Hello, class. I wanted to make this little video for you so that I could talk you through the steps on how to conduct your first professional learning community group meeting. Okay, after you've done it once or twice, you'll have the feel for it. But just to help you get started, I thought I'd make a little video. Okay, so right now I'm going to share my screen with you and I'm going to show you um, our Canvas shell. And for week 6, module 6, we have right here under the uh, culture things that we did with Indigenous residential schooling, we have the PLC content. Now, my online asynchronous group, you don't have these particular items on your Canvas unit, but that's okay. You didn't need those. Those were for the face-to-face classes. But all of you are going to be doing your first PLC meeting with your groups. So the first thing that you want to do before you actually meet is go over the rules of conduct for PLCs. Okay. I'm just going to show you like what the documents are and then go through and talk a little bit more about what they are. So we got the rules of conduct for PLCs. Of course, you know that's going to be big about professionalism. And then the next thing we have here is an example of a super job on PLC meeting minutes. Each group will be turning in meeting minutes, and each of you who attend the PLC meeting, which is required, you will have your set of the meeting notes to turn in. Okay, so I want you to see what good notes look like and what I'm expecting. And then I'm going to give you a blank form to be able to use. And here is the PLC meeting number 1, the agenda. Okay. And then next I have a video link here. This is Dr. Luis Alvarez, and he's explaining the history of education for Latinx learners and schooling today through the Lemon Grove incident. And that video is 10 minutes and 41 seconds. That's super important because what Dr. Alvarez is talking about for the Latinx learners is an example of what you are going to be doing with your PLC group, and you're going to be creating a timeline. That tends to be a very popular assignment. Students really like that. So that is where you're headed, and he gives you an example of what you're going to be doing. And he's using the Latinx learner experience, and he's linking the history of education for Latinx learners and schooling today. So you will be doing that as well. And then you have also your instructions for what you're going to be working on for the first part of your timeline project. So you have 2 major assignments with your PLC groups. So this is really critical because you cannot pass this course if you do not successfully complete the PLC group assignments. So it depends on your professionalism in your group as you participate and the kind of product that you create. So usually students like it, they usually have a good time. So try to have an open mind and think about it as this wonderful learning opportunity that it really is. We're very fortunate to have this opportunity to study together and be at such a wonderful campus. So sometimes it is easy to feel overwhelmed and overworked and underappreciated, and not remember that not everyone who would like to go to college is able to, And as much as it's a sacrifice and hard work, it should be some joyous as well. And it should also be appreciated as a wonderful opportunity. I'm certainly grateful for my opportunity to not only have been an undergraduate student and a graduate student, but also to continue learning. So I hope that joy of learning is with you as well. So that's kind of part of what this assignment is. Education, culture, and society is a social foundations course. It's not a methods course. So it's important that you know like what it is that we're trying to accomplish so that you're not frustrated in our course where you're expecting one thing and I'm providing another thing. That is a sure recipe for frustration. So if you understand that it's not a methods course, although I do try to model for you some methods, I try to bring some in. What would this look like enacted in practice? So you should be filling your toolbox with plenty of strategies and methods, especially for the online or for the face-to-face group. For the online group, I know that's a little bit harder for you because we don't directly talk and it's asynchronous. So that's a little harder, but you can still pick up things too. Like, for example, how I like to use poetry. That is a strategy for conveying and interacting and teaching and learning and assessment. So there's many things that you can do if you just watch. Okay. So I'm going to go over some of these topics for you, and I will try to make this as brief as I can. Okay. So for the rules of conduct for your PLC, this is pretty basic. You know where the document is. Um, for the online group, for the asynchronous 30, it's 30I, section 30I. Your group, you determine the format and the time, since you're asynchronous and not everybody is in Cedar City. For our face-to-face groups, you're going to use our class time and you must meet face-to-face, and it is on campus. Meetings should be 50 to 60 minutes, and each meeting should start with a little brief icebreaker. It can be something as simple as what did everybody have for breakfast this morning if you had breakfast? What's your favorite color? When is your birthday? It can be any kind of a little kind of check-in icebreaker. So do that. Don't let it take too much time, no more than 2 to 3 minutes, 5 at the most. Okay. So check in, and remember that you're going to be interacting with each other as an I thou. Okay. And then every meeting will have a group leader or moderator. I would actually prefer the word coordinator, maybe lead coordinator, because you're all the leaders, and you're all the scribes. So one person might be taking the lead, but everyone is responsible for the group's work. Okay. Um, so this job is going to rotate. The leader's job is to facilitate movement from the agenda items. And if somebody says struggling a little bit, help them out, okay? But that doesn't mean you don't each come prepared and depend on others to pull you through. Pull your weight. Everyone should have read the modules, assigned materials before attending the meeting so that you don't waste any of your time. Remember, this is a flipped classroom. Even if you're in the online group, you need to have read the material to be ready to discuss it together so you don't waste each other's time. In every meeting, there is a note taker. Okay, so somebody's going to be taking the notes, but everybody should be taking some notes because the note taker is going to have a hard time participating if they're trying to focus on jotting down what's actually happening. So it helps if everyone kind of helps with that to put together the final notes. Okay. Um, let's see. I will send you the agenda so you don't have to worry about creating an agenda. What I want to see on the notes, though, is I want to see a representative snapshot of what was said and discussed during the meeting. I don't need every single play-by-play. I don't need all of that, not word for word, but I need some pretty precise snapshots of what you talked about, who said what. Just give me a sample of what people are saying, and I'll show you some notes that show that. I don't want just summary points. I want to know. I can't delve into what you talked about if you just give me, one line summaries. I don't know what that discussion was like. So I need to be able to read your notes and feel enough of your notes that I can get a sense of who said what and who participated, what was the gist and the direction of the conversation. Okay. So you got to kind of hit that middle point. I don't want it too brief that I have no idea what your summary means, or I don't need a play by play and need to know every little cough. Um, um, I don't need all of those. Okay. So hit that happy medium. Each PLC member submits their own copy of the same agenda meeting notes for that week. Thus, each member of the group will be uploading their own copy to Canvas. Okay. Once the discussion is complete on the assigned topic, you can feel free to discuss other topics that are important to the group, but please make sure that your meeting does not go over 60 minutes because people are very busy and we want to be respectful of their time. Okay. Again, you must be in a format where you can see each other in real time. If you're in the online asynchronous class, that can be Zoom, it can be FaceTime, it can be Google Hangout. For the face-to-face group, you must meet on campus in person. Okay. Everybody should be there the entire time. Don't arrive late. Don't leave early. Um, there should be no reason for that because our class is scheduled at a particular time. You all have the same period free. Now think about this. If you're the classroom teacher and these important things come up and you have to, and you're like, well, I need to go do this. How's your principal going to take that? You can say, well, it's very important. I had to do this or that. That happens too often and it goes into your human resources file. So, it's just a good idea not to do that kind of thing. Make your education a priority. Practice being professional right now. Okay. If something happens that you do miss, again, make that a rare exception. Don't miss. Um, Okay. Once you're in your group, if you're shy, push yourself, share yourself. Each of you have some wonderful experiences and personalities and energy to share with us. We all learn from you. So please share. So push yourself. If you're a talker, I know I am. I have to watch myself that I don't take up too much verbal space. So, try to keep that in mind as well. So, it's the whole group's responsibility for PLC assignments, not just one person, not just the scribe, not just the leader, and you rotate that. Okay, so enough said on that. Um, let's see. What do meeting notes look like? Okay, here is a copy of some notes that I asked a group if I could just keep them because they were really good. And so this is an example. Their names are on it because I did ask them and they gave them to me. So notice how it's very precise. They have their group number, their week meeting, the dates on there. Now, this was for an online class, online asynchronous, so they were meeting on Zoom. They were not a face-to-face. They had their agenda, their purpose of meeting and objectives. They had who they assigned as their minute taker, their timekeeper, note taker, And then here's their agenda items. Now this came from the agenda that I gave them. So they went through and they were talking about key concepts from the module that week. And notice that they do give me a flavor of what they're talking about here. Our goal is to be aware of our prejudices and the information that are based upon and work to correct that information. Here, this was really interesting. They were discussing chapters 3 and 4, and I got kind of a sense of like how they were understanding the material that they were reading. Um, they they had questions they wanted to ask. And notice here that I know that Anna was the one who was talking about discrimination based off of the assumptions of superiority. So I knew that's what Anna was contributing. Then Demi contributed this and Lexi contributed to that. You can see how they're building on each other and working together. And they do the same thing throughout the rest of the document. So then they're planning for their next meeting and what their next assignment coming up due is. So they've got some assignments that they work together on. Another assignment that was coming due, they weren't working on that one together. Each of you will have your own archaeology of self, but they were talking about it together. So that was something they added to the agenda. And so you can see that it's not a play by play, but I do have a lot of sense of who said what, who contributed, what was the flavor of their conversation, what kind of questions did they have, and so on. So that was super helpful. That is a wonderful example of some notes. That's what I would like your notes to look like as well. Okay. So you can put your own little spin on it and everything, but basically that's what I want. Okay. Let's see. The next thing I want to show you is what is your agenda. Okay. So you have the agenda on Canvas as well. And so what you're going to be doing for your agenda, the assigned leader, you should know who that is. And if you don't know, it's under the People tab on Canvas, and you click your group and your leader will be listed there. That computer randomly generates that. I don't decide that at all. So that person, and be patient because, you know, the first meeting's always a little rocky. Okay. So begin by welcoming everyone and reminding about that the meeting's not supposed to go for 60 minutes and everyone should fully participate. There's your icebreaker is the next thing on the agenda. And then you're going to review the rules of conduct. You can just skim through that. You know, just make sure that you as a group know, check for understanding, make sure everybody's on the same page. So you can zip through that fairly quickly. Um, keep time, you know, your note should say at, you know, 10:05, whatever it is, then that you were talking about rules of conduct. And then moving on, decide who's going to be the note taker. That I would decide, you know, right away, because look at, you've already done these things over here. So this should probably be number one. I should revise this. So I apologize that that might be a little confusing. You need notes, so you need a note taker right away. Okay. Now again, this is for the note taker. Note taker, we're going to be patient with you every meeting because you have the hardest job. So everybody take your own notes and help the note taker, because the note taker can't participate very well without people helping. They're trying to write things down, so help them out. Okay, so once you have a good set of notes that is thorough and complete and has the time and enough sample of what everybody said during the meeting, then the note taker is going to distribute them. You have each other's email. You can use the Canvas email, and the note taker will send it out to the person, to everybody in the group. So you each will have a copy of the notes that the note taker finalized. Okay. And then each of you will upload them to the PLC meeting number 1 Dropbox on Canvas. Okay, if somebody was not at the meeting, left early, came late, they don't get a copy. Okay, so develop three group norms. You decide on that together, and then with each meeting, you can decide, are those working for us? Do we need to revisit them? Do we need different ones? Think about that. Okay, and then tentatively, a little bit of housekeeping. We'll have 4 official meetings. Right now, that's what we have tentatively scheduled. They tentatively means that it's may change, leave a little bit of wiggle room in there. We want to be responsive to what we're doing in our class. So tentatively week 8, week 9, and week 12. Okay, so be ready to be flexible on that. Okay. Number 7 on the agenda, explain why it is important for teachers to connect schooling's past and present to create an inclusive, equitable educational future for all learners. Our class is called School, Society, and Diversity. That's foundational because schools are microcosms of society. So if you can understand how schools and its institution of schooling are connected, and how differences have historically been understood as deficits, as deviance, then you are very well prepared to redirect toward educational equity instead of contributing the next generation of recreating and maintaining the educational pipeline, which continues to leak. We want it to stop leaking. Okay, and you will play a key role in whether the next generation is able to get some leaking stopped, or if you continue the leaks, or maybe even make the leaks worse. I don't know. So you're going to be discussing Dr. Alvarez's video, the exploring the links between the history of education for Latinx learners and schooling through the Lemon Grove incident. So remember, we talked about that already. It's on Canvas. So you should not be watching it together. You should have already watched it. Okay. You can watch it together, but that's going to cut into some of your 50 to 60 minutes. Okay, so you decide about that for yourself. I wouldn't. I would come ready to go, have that done. And if everybody's already watched it, then you can discuss that and move on through it. Item 8 on your agenda, this is where you're going to look at your timeline project. What are you supposed to do together? Okay, so if you've read these instructions before you come together as a group, it's going to go much faster than trying to read through it slowly, individually. As a group, you're going to have to wait for each other. So if you read it on your own and then come to the meeting having already read it, you can talk about it, discuss, move forward a lot more efficiently. I have 6 children and 2 stepchildren, and so I'm all about doing things effectively and efficiently. So that would be my suggestion, having worked in many groups and on many committees myself. Okay, so you're going to read through or talk about that, having already read through them. You're going to come up with a plan for completing your timeline project, which is a jigsaw project. So I will talk about that in a minute. We'll come back to that. So on your agenda for item number 9, after the note taker distributes your group's meeting 1 agenda notes, each PLC group member will upload their copy of the notes to Canvas before Sunday deadline. you know, how I always say, well before 11:59 p.m., just so you give yourself a bumper of time just in case the internet goes down, your computer's not working, whatever it is, you have room for emergencies just in case you have it done a little bit ahead of time. You're not racing the clock. Okay. I'll show you where that is as well. And you know this well by now. Did you know that it takes about 6 to 7 times of hearing something consistently for it to sink into even the short-term memory? So think about how the brain works and how the functioning of the brain. You got to work with the brain to be able to facilitate long-term and short-term learning. So that's just a FYI. It works better if teachers understand how brains work. Okay. So that's why I like to kind of say it more than once to be sure that you hear it, and that especially for my online asynchronous class, I think you know, for you, you're having to read the owner's manual all the time, and you don't necessarily have the direct contact to ask clarification questions. So with this, I really want to be sure that you're clear about the important things. So that's your agenda. Then you wrap it up and make sure that you're within your 50-minute, 50 to 60-minute time. So here I'm back on Canvas, and here is your Dropbox for um for your meeting agenda. I'll edit that to say PLC group number one, meeting number one, agenda notes, so that you know that that's what goes here to this Dropbox. Okay, this is where each of you will put your own copy. So don't expect the note taker to upload your notes for you. Your note taker is going to send you a copy of the notes, and you look them over, each of you look them over and say, is there anything missing? Is this what we want to submit? Because you're going to get the same grade because it's a group project, but you each have to upload your own. Then you're going to also upload during week 7, you're going to evaluate yourself, your not only yourself, but your group mates on how they participated in the meeting. Okay. So that's for the next week. So just keep that in mind. You're going to be evaluated. All right. So now let's take just a minute to look at what the instructions are for the timeline project, what you're going to be working on. Your first two agendas, your first two PLC meetings will be for your timeline project. The timeline project has 2 phases, phase 1 or part 1 and phase 2 or part 2. And part 1 is about the historical part of schooling. And then the part 2 is how do those historical patterns tie into and influence schooling today? So how will they shape you as a teacher today? Okay, so I want you to look just before I pull up the instructions on the timeline here. See, you have all of these documents available for you right here. Rules of conduct, example of super notes. Here's your form that you're going to fill out. Here's your agenda. Here's the video that you're going to be talking about from your agenda. And here we go. Here's the instructions. I'm going to click that in a minute here. Instructions, PLC timeline project instructions for part 1. Okay. Now, before I click that, let me just quickly go down here, and you notice there's some topics here. Topic A, history of U.S. schooling. There's 2 articles available for topic A. This is about how did public schoolings come about? You know, we didn't have that when the United States was founded in 1776. It wasn't around. It was actually called the Common Schools movement first. It wasn't called public schooling. So there's a whole, that's a topic, quite interesting why it came about that. Um, right there. Topic B is very interesting as well. There's only one article here on topic B. Some of them have two, some of them have one. Topic B is the history of special education. So historically, there has not always been special education. Parents and communities and families have had to work really hard for special education to be part of public schooling. And that's a fairly recent thing. So that's pretty interesting. So see, as you see these topics, if there's something grabbing your attention here, kind of know what they are. Topic C, the history of education of girls and women in the US. This one is tricky because a lot of times when you try to Google articles for the history of girls and women, you're going to get international things. But we're looking at the history of education for girls and women in the United States. There is still a need for that because women still don't go into STEM, science, technology, that sort of engineering, that sort of thing, as great of numbers. Women are still underrepresented in a lot of areas that are math and science based. So there is still a need for that, and you don't necessarily hear people talking about it unless they're talking about it in international settings, like maybe in Muslim identified countries, where even women and girls being able to read is still somewhat political. So we're talking about in the US. Topic D is the history of Native American education. Topic E is history of African American education. So that's a little different than just Black education. It's specifically African American. So there's two articles here on that for topic E. Topic F, I know some people are very interested in this. This is what I did my dissertation on, history of education of English language learners. Okay, that's topic F. Topic G, history of education of Asian Americans. Very interesting. Topic H, history of Latinx learners. This one's very, very critical to Utah, um, because Utah was in the land that was part of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And so this is very personal to us in Utah. The border crossed us. We didn't cross the border, because Utah was part of Mexico. So that's critical. Topic, okay, so there's only A through H. Those are the topics, okay? So what are you going to do with those topics? I hope something grabbed your fancy with those topics, because that's what we're going to be looking at. What I'm opening now is the instructions for the timeline, part 1. Okay, so you can read all of this here. We've talked about this here, that teachers are the X factor. So if you can understand these historical trajectories of this relationship among school, society, and diversity, and now we're able to say social differences, we know that's more accurate. Our course is called School, Society, and Diversity, but actually it should actually be titled School, Society, and Social Differences. That would actually be more accurate. So I didn't write the title of the course. That's what I inherited, but you know that that's not exactly accurate. It's fine, but it's not very precise. Okay, So schools are obviously an important institution in the United States, and then teachers, they kind of make the difference. Is it going to go this way dangerous, as in, wow, learning is so powerful, and I can really learn and have tools to really make a difference in my world? That's a beautiful kind of powerful. Or is teacher going to be dangerous as far as, um, you know, funneling kids into that already leaking pipeline? You know, a lot of times teachers have good intentions, but regardless of their intentions, they end up, um, pushing kids into the pipeline and then blaming the kids for it. Okay, so teachers have to know how to connect the past and society's present to create educational equity. And if you remember in our syllabus, we are only interested in educational equity. Inequity and leaking pipelines, we have enough of that. We don't need any more. We're trying to reverse that. Okay, so things like kill the Indian, save the man, those were major contributors to leaking pipelines. And today we feel the residue of that in our classrooms, whether we know about it or not. So you need to know about why are the babies in the river to be able to redirect the babies, and address why are the babies in the river. Okay, so that's what this assignment is basically about. And so if you look in our syllabus, it says that you as the student, as learner, that you're going to explore the role of changing demographics in US public schooling, and you're going to apply that to notions of the public good, equity, citizenship, positive growth and development. Have you heard those terms before? I'm sure you have, because you probably grew up in the United States. You may have. And even if you didn't, then you probably have heard those words. We say them a lot around the 4th of July. We talk about that we're a democracy. So public good, equity, citizenship, positive growth and development, those are key topics that we're invested in the United States as a democracy, and schools are supposed to play a role in promoting that, those topics of public good and citizenship and equity for our rising generations, of the next generations of Americans. So we need to know about that, because that's part of our job as teachers. And we're going to be discussing the development, maintenance, and transformation of social differences versus diversity. You know about that. So the topics that we're going to explore are based on social differences, and you're going to see that education has not been equitable based on those social differences. So even today, if you look at stats of the leaking educational pipeline, you will see, for example, that Indigenous learners tend to be pushed out of the pipeline at just massive rates. And so this is why this topic here is so important. Not even though differences are different from what, they're not equally valued in a hierarchy, means that some are valued more than others. And how do we know that some differences are valued more than others? Because the educational pipeline is leaking, and it's leaking based on differences from the normative standards of US society. So if you don't match that normative standard of US society, you are on track to be in the leak of the educational pipeline. So as a teacher, especially a public school teacher, the public means that it's about everyone having an equal opportunity. And as a public school teacher, I don't get to say, well, I'll educate you, but not you. The idea is that everyone that comes through my door, I'm going to teach all of you, so that all of you have an equitable opportunity. And I can't do that unless I'm aware. For example, if I want if you are my daughter's teachers, then I know that girls, that's a gender difference, the social difference based on gender. I know that girls are pushed out of math and science at higher rates, not because teachers are bad people, but often because of implicit biases and assumptions and curriculum and lots of things that good teachers end up helping contributing to pushing girls or allowing girls to help push themselves out. And so as a teacher, I have to say, well, I understand the history of what has happened to girls with equitable access to math and science. I'm going to make sure that all of these girls in my classroom are going to have access to quality math and science education so that they can make the honest choice. Maybe they still don't want to go into math and science, not a problem, but at least it was a real option for them. Do you see what equity is? They need to have the same options that are for male gendered students. But if they don't even have that as a choice, it's not equitable. So that's what that hierarchy of differences is. Okay, now what you're going to be producing with your group is a jigsaw assignment. And I don't know if you've ever worked with a jigsaw project or not. They can seem a little confusing, but they're very efficient and very effective once you kind of understand how they work. So jigsaw, think about a jigsaw puzzle. And each PLC group is a puzzle, and each of you in the group are a piece of that puzzle, and you come together as a whole. Okay, so each PLC group will work together to create their own historical timeline of US public schooling by jigsawing individual pieces of the timeline into one whole puzzle or one um, timeline project that is unified. Okay, so you're each going to be doing different pieces, but then you're going to bring the puzzle pieces together to create one timeline. Okay, so look over the following of the 8 topics, and I showed you where they were on our canvas. Okay, history of education, we've already gone over these, so you know where these are on canvas. Okay, all right, so you look them over. As a PLC group, at least the number of education topics of the number of scholars in your group. So if you have 4 scholars in your group, you're going to need 4 topics. If you have 3 scholars in your group, you're going to need 3 topics. If you have 2 scholars in your group, you're going to need 2 topics. Okay? So each group is then going to decide on 3 topics from A through F. You can choose more than the number of people in your group, but not less. So let's say that one group says, well, we're going to do A and D and G because we have 3 people in our group, and those are the 3 that we're interested in. Okay, great. Whatever you're interested in. Okay. Once you have decided that, then you're going to jigsaw those. And that means that each person in the PLC group will take at least one of the topics, the one that you chose, and they are responsible for contributing to the whole timeline puzzle by completing the next steps for their jigsaw assignment. So, for example, if PLC Group 11 has 3 members, there's Julie, Jack, and Jane, and together they have chosen the history of African Americans, the history of Indigenous Americans, and the history of girls and women, then Julie is going to, she says, I want the puzzle piece that's the history of women's education in the US. Jack says, well, I'm going to take the piece that has African American. And then Jane says, well, I'm going to do the piece about Indigenous education. So, they assign those topics to each other. Then for each person, then then you're going to choose 3 to 4 historical events that are important to that group in relation to school, society, and diversity, aka social differences. Okay, so if PLC group, um, let's focus on Jack from our example, and Jack's doing the education of African Americans. Then he reads the article on African Americans and he finds another article on the history of education of African Americans, and he says, wow, 3 things that are super important to African American education are that there were laws defining literacy for Black people as a capital crime. Like if you were Black and learned how to read and write, you could be killed. Then the next thing that he discovers is the freedom schools of Septima Clark and Mary Bethune Cook and Carter G. Woodson. And so he feels that that's the next major thing that's influencing them. And then maybe he says, well, there were competing ideas about how Blacks should be educated, and Dr. Du Bois was one view of it, and Mr. Booker T. Washington was the other. And so those were main influences influencing the history of African American education. Then Jane's going to do the same thing with her puzzle piece. She's going to find 3 to 4 major historical events for the group that she had. And Jill's going to do the same thing with hers. So each person in the puzzle is going to find 3 to 4 issues that were important to their group's education. Okay, so if it's the history of women, it might be something along the lines of that. Women were only taught to sing, paint, dance, and keep house. So that was the quality of education for them. So that might be one thing, what the curriculum was. So, and then find 2 to 3 other things for that. Then they're going to pull those back together. Okay, so and this here says week 5, module 5, but that's actually week 6. I'll fix that. Okay, so there's articles there, you can use those, but you need 2 sources. You could use one that's on Canvas already provided for you, but find another. So each person in the group is going to need at least one other source. I put a source on Canvas for you. You go find a source also, a credible source. Okay, so each of the 3 to 4 historical events for each puzzle piece should have a short explanation. Okay, your explanations don't need to have complete sentences, but they need to be precise enough that when anybody else reads your timeline, they're like, oh, that's what that means. Okay, just like your Take It and Make It projects. Okay, and then you're going to bring everything together into one big timeline. Okay, so you've got the different topics that you chose, and you're going to be putting them together in one big timeline. So it can't be like Jack says, well, I emailed in my part, I don't know what Jill and Jane did. No, it has to be in one unified, cohesive whole project. Okay, the whole group is going to fail if your project isn't having all of the puzzle pieces coming together in one unified whole. Okay, so you can be very creative with how you want to put your timeline together. I've seen some really neat timelines. I've seen them done as kind of like comic book strips. I've seen them done as little presentations. I've seen them as videos or booklets. You can be very creative with how you create your timeline. Okay, so your finished timeline must have each PLC group member's name. It should be easily visible on the introduction screen, and it should also have a reference or bibliography section. So I'm going to see that you used my reference that I provided on Canvas, and then you also used one that you chose. Okay. And then the last thing, we're going to decide when it's going to be due, but you can plan on having about 2 to 3 full weeks to work on it. This is supposed to be the word transitions here. I'll fix that little typo. Okay. So, and then for part 2, phase 2, what that's going to be is we're going to take what you did in part 1 and we're going to say, well, how does that link to what we see in schools today? You know, why is the past important to the present? Okay, so we'll worry about that later. And of course, you will be evaluating each other on your professionalism for each meeting and then also for when your project is turned in. Okay, so it's very important that we don't have anybody that's hard to get a hold of, that turns their work in at the last minute, that expects somebody in the group to pull it all together and carry the load. No, everyone needs to help. It's not done for anybody until everybody has their project as one polished, unified whole. Okay, so that is super, super important. Okay, and I think I covered everything on there. I hope so. Email me with any questions that you might have. And I think that's about it for now. Okay.